Hello, everyone. Welcome to March's Heritage Live with Coquitlam Heritage. Coquitlam Heritage is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coquitlam First Nation. Today's presentation is about photo preservation with special guest Emily Lonie, who is the archivist for the city of Coquitlam. Emily will be taking us through the basics of photo preservation so you can save your precious family memories for future generations. My name is Abby Lise, and I am the operations coordinator for Coquitlam Heritage. We will be doing a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. So if you are joining us on the Zoom webinar, there's a Q&A icon where you can type in your questions. I will also be monitoring the Facebook Live. So if you have any questions, you can type them in as a comment. And when Emily is finished her presentation, we'll answer any questions that you have. Feel free to ask a question during any part of the presentation, and we will get to them at the end. And with that, I'm going to send it over to Emily.
Great, thank you. Okay. So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about preserving photographs. I want to thank the staff at Coquitlam Heritage for inviting me to be part of this live series. This is a presentation that I've done a portion of in person, so it's great to be able to give this as a virtual presentation now. So my name, as Abby mentioned, is Emily Lonie, and I'm the city archivist at the City of Coquitlam Archives. So first off, I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the archives, which is at the corner of Pine Tree Way and Northern Avenue. It is on the core traditional territory of the Coquitlam Nation, which lies within the shared territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Musqueam, Squamish, and Stolo Nations. Okay, so let's get to it. So this presentation will be a brief introduction to preserving your family photos. I'll be providing some information on the risks to photographs and also the benefits of preserving them. I'll then introduce you to some of the supplies you will need to get started and touch very briefly on conservation and digitization. And then finally, I'm going to discuss the process of donating materials to an archives, should that be something of interest to you. So here's the goal. You have a collection of family photographs at home. Maybe you don't know where to start. You want to turn your collection of unorganized, unlabeled, or maybe improperly stored material into this. Okay, so this is maybe a little bit of an exaggeration. This image is a goal for an archivist like me, but in terms of preserving your family records, the important thing is to make sure that your photos are in appropriate enclosures that will prevent degradation and decay over time. So maybe your goal looks something more like this. Whatever your personal preservation goal might be, the overall goal should be to keep your family memories lasting as long as possible. So ensuring your family memories are preserved for generations to come, that's always going to be a worthwhile project and a worthwhile investment of your time. So the first thing to do when you embark on a preservation project is to evaluate what you have. So maybe you have a set of loose photographs that's been stored in a box, or maybe you have a series of photo albums, maybe those types with the images stuck on the sticky backed surface. So we call those magnetic albums. Whatever your collection may include, the important thing to remember is that a photograph really has to be worth investing the time and money it will take to preserve it properly. So you want to make sure that the photographs you're preserving are important enough to justify the effort. So to determine what should be preserved, it can be helpful to ask yourself a number of questions. So first off, do the photographs document significant events? Do the photographs document maybe a special holiday or family tradition? Will keeping the photographs help to create a picture of what your family's life was like in the past? Second, do the photographs have particular sentimental or aesthetic value? So think about, do the photographs help you recall a special or emotional time in your life? Or are the photographs particularly beautiful or artistic? Number 3, what was the context of the creation of these photographs? When was the photograph taken? Who took it? Why did they take it? By knowing the context of creation, often a photograph will be seen to have more value because we can understand how it came to be. Number 4, do the photographs relate to other photographs in your collection? So do they help you to interpret other photographs? Do you have any records that provide more information about the photographs? So for example, a photo of a graduation ceremony is made more valuable when it's accompanied by the program from that ceremony. And number 5, are the photos in good shape? Is there evidence of staining, mold, maybe they're curling? These will all impact your ability to preserve the photos. So you'll have to have a sense of what kind of intervention will be required to preserve the photographs. In some cases, the cost of preserving might actually outweigh the value of keeping the photographs. So when thinking about value, it's also important to consider that family records, as with all records, they may have different types of value. So sentimental value is derived from personal or emotional associations with a given record. It comes from how you feel about the record, what memories that record inspires. Now, historical, archival, or research value, on the other hand, is value that justifies permanent preservation by a heritage institution. So in the case of a business or government department, for example, records with archival value will actually amount to under 3% of all of the records produced. So a very small subset of all of the records that are produced. So these are the essential records that are maintained because of their legal, fiscal, evidential, or historical information. Now, monetary value is quite different. It's the estimated amount of money that the item would bring if offered for sale in an open market. So it's unlikely that personal photography will have monetary value, unless of course you are a famous photographer or someone in your family was particularly famous. So a family record may have one type of value or potentially a combination of all 3 of these value types. So let me give you some examples to help illustrate the concept of value in its various forms when it comes to records. So here's a photograph of Uncle John dressed in his military uniform in a training camp during the First World War. Now, this photograph may have sentimental value for John's wife and daughter or granddaughter. It may also have archival value to the local archives that is putting together a display, maybe about local men who fought in the First World War. Or it might even have national archival value. Library and Archives Canada, which is Canada's national archives, will have Uncle John's military service file as part of the more than 620,000 service files from the First World War. So perhaps Uncle John won a Distinguished Service Medal. In this case, the photo of him at the training camp might actually have national archival value because it adds even more depth to our understanding of those who fought in the war. It's unlikely that this photograph would have monetary value on the open market because there are hundreds and thousands of photographs of former soldiers available. So example number 2, while sifting through materials at a garage sale, you happen upon a glass negative showing a photograph of a flower. It looks like an interesting piece, so you decide to buy it for the 50 cents that they want for it. Now, this photograph will likely not have any sentimental value given that you just purchased it at a garage sale. However, when you get home, you notice a number and a name on the plate, and that name is W.J. Moore. After some research, you realize that Moore was a famous Vancouver photographer. Some further research may uncover that the City of Vancouver Archives and the City of Coquitlam Archives both have collections of Moore's photographs. So these have historical or archival value and have been preserved by these archival institutions. So it's therefore likely that this glass negative could have archival value. It's a possibility that the glass negative may have some monetary value given the photographer. However, it's likely limited given the subject matter of the photograph. It's probably more valuable as part of an archival collection that can be accessed by all kinds of researchers. And a third example that will likely be more relevant to you currently is maybe you have a series of photographs from a family road trip to Cape Breton in the 1960s. So these photos might bring back wonderful memories of a childhood trip. As such, the photographs might have significant sentimental value to you. There are likely thousands of photographs just like these taken by thousands of families over the years. So it's unlikely that these photographs will have archival value. Now, that being said, there's always a chance that the local archives may be interested depending on the photographs. You can always make inquiries to check just in case, but more likely you will want to hang on to these for your own purposes. And there would be no monetary value to these photographs. Okay, let's talk about risk. Photographs can be quite challenging to preserve. The environment in which your photographs are stored has a significant impact on their longevity. So it's important to always try to create as stable an environment as possible for your photographs. Now, light is particularly problematic for photos, especially for color prints. The dark is really a photo's best friend. So if you want to display photographs, consider making copies and displaying the copies. This will ensure the originals last as long as possible. You will also want to avoid using any adhesives like tape and glue. Adhesives are very acidic and will discolor and break down photographs over time. So if you're planning to put photographs into a scrapbook, I would recommend that you consider using photo corners rather than tape or glue. And at all costs, avoid those magnetic albums that I discussed earlier with those sticky backs. These were very popular in the mid to late 20th century, and I have lots from my childhood, but they're particularly problematic because their pages contain a very acidic type of adhesive that causes photos to fade. And also the photos in these albums they'll either fall out or they'll become difficult to remove because the adhesive becomes stickier over time or loses its adhesiveness. So it'll go one way or the other. Really, these magnetic albums are a nightmare for preservation, but we do have quite a few of them in our collection. So the type of film can also be a risk factor. A quick word of caution about negatives. Most of the negatives you'll have at home will be made of modern cellulose acetate film, which is better known as safety film, which was introduced in the early 20th century as a safe film base. And this replaced the highly flammable cellulose nitrate film of the 19th and early 20th centuries. So if you happen to have some very old negatives and think there's a chance you might have some nitrate film in your family collection, I would advise you to consult a conservator or a nitrate film lab or archives. It's not advisable to have this type of film in your house because it's incredibly flammable if exposed to heat. Lastly, rough handling presents a risk to photographs, so always be gentle. When handling photographic prints and slides, it's best to wear traditional cotton or newer inert plastic nitrile gloves. If you are trying to eliminate waste, then I would recommend the washable cotton gloves. Those will be your best bet. Wearing gloves ensures that you're not transferring the oils from your fingers onto the emulsion of the photographs. So the oil on your hand can actually be incredibly damaging to photographs. So you want to avoid handling them as much as possible. Wearing gloves will also prevent scratching, which can damage negatives and prints, particularly negatives. Now, before considering the types of enclosures you'll be using to store your photographs, it's important to ensure that your photos are actually ready to go into proper storage. So over time, photos that have not been stored properly will tend to curl, like we're seeing in this slide. So this is caused by changes in humidity levels. When humidity levels rise, the paper support for the photograph actually expands while the chemical side stays more stable. So this is why the photo will actually curl inwards. So you may also find that larger prints have been rolled for storage. So this happened with a lot of panoramic prints. High humidity levels and changes in temperature will cause the photo to want to stay in this rolled state. And rolling can also cause cracks in the photograph over time. So in extreme cases, you may want to take valuable photographs, whatever value you think, value to society, value to your family. You might want to take those to a conservator if they're very badly curled. However, there are ways that you can relax the photos at home. There's a fairly simple DIY solution that won't break the bank, and I will provide a link at the end of the presentation. These rolled photographs in the slide are actually some that my uncle found among my grandmother's possessions after she passed away. Luckily, he has an archivist in the family, so I sent him a few videos and websites with some step-by-step instructions on how he could uncurl the photographs at home. He really enjoyed the challenge and found that it was incredibly effective, and he was able to flatten all of the photos. Now, once you've sorted photographs and flattened any that have curled, I would highly recommend labeling them with any information that you may have about the subjects of the photographs. So you can include important information such as names, dates, and places. This will be, I promise you, of great help to anyone looking at these records after you. The future will thank you. And you will make the photographs much more valuable as a family treasure. Now, you can choose to label the photos directly, or you can label the enclosures. Now, if you choose to label the photos themselves, you can't just use any old pen or marker on your photos, because using the wrong kind of pen will actually damage your photo. So here's some advice for labeling photos. First off, always write on the back. So you don't want to damage the front of the image. Or you can use alternative ways of identifying the photos where possible. So you could choose to write on an envelope or put a label on a plastic enclosure. If you're labeling the enclosure, you just have to be careful that those photos don't get separated from their enclosures. Never use a pen, highlighter, or permanent marker because the inks can actually smear, and they often have non-archival oils and solvents in them that will bleed through to the front. So it's best to use a soft 2B pencil. You can get the 2B pencils at most places. Using a pencil is reversible and it's easily erased. And also pencil lead is relatively inert, so it won't leach into the print. There are some pencils that actually they sell these days that will write on the more modern plasticized photo paper. So these are available from archival supply companies if you have a big collection of those more plasticized photographs in your collection. Remember not to press too hard or you might damage the image on the other side. And if you're writing on the enclosures, always write information on the enclosures before putting the photographs inside, just so you prevent any pressure transfer. Okay, well, let's get your flattened, labeled photos stored. So you have a few options to choose from when it comes to storing your photos. The most common method, and typically the most economical, is to use archival quality plastic enclosures that are made of either polyester, polyethylene, or polypropylene. These types of enclosures, if ordered from archival supply stores or archival supply companies, will have undergone a photographic activity test, otherwise known as a PAT. Now, this is an international standard that evaluates the interactions between photographic images and the enclosures in which they're stored. So always look for plastic enclosure products to mention that they've passed this PAT. So these archival quality plastic enclosures come in a large variety of sizes and shapes, and most often come with holes printed along the side, which enables you to place them in a 3-ring archival quality binder or in an archival binder box. So this is a simple but effective way of storing large numbers of photographs of varying sizes. You will eliminate the danger posed by handling the photographs, and you'll avoid transferring any oils from your hands onto the images when you or anyone else in the future looks at the photos. Now, another option is to use the same type of box that you would use to store your documents, which we call a Hollinger box, and use a variety of acid-free archival envelopes instead of the plastic enclosures. So if you find that your house has quite high humidity levels, not really so much of a problem in our climate, but maybe in more southerly climates, if you find that there's high humidity levels, the plastic may not be the best bet for you, and envelopes may actually be a better solution. These come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. Some have a plastic window on the front, as seen in the middle of the slide, so you can see the photograph without removing it from the envelope, while others are opaque and are best used for photographs that you're not planning to access very frequently. So perhaps your photos are already housed in an album or maybe in a scrapbook. So these can be a bit tricky to preserve, and they come in a variety of forms, each with unique preservation and storage requirements. So general best practice is to put an album in a polyethylene bag and then place it in a drop front archival box so that it lies flat and is protected from moisture. If the photographs in an album or scrapbook are glued in, or they're taped to the pages or stuck to that magnetic type album and can't be safely removed without causing damage, it's best to try not to remove them, leave them in place. You're likely to do more damage to the photos by trying to get them out. So instead, it's a good idea to put a layer of unbuffered archival tissue between each page, and this will prevent the acidic paper from one side damaging the photos on the other. So it's always best to keep a scrapbook or photo album intact as much as possible, because whoever created it put it together in a certain way for a reason. And dismantling the album will lose vital contextual information. With these types of records, it's always a balancing act between, maintaining the contextual information and the preservation of the individual content. So this is something that we weigh the importance of the content and context with the preservation needs of the individual item. So the City of Coquitlam Archives has a fact sheet available that specifically discusses the preservation of scrapbooks and photo albums. So please feel free to get in touch with us if you're interested in this fact sheet. Now, it's always best to hold on to your photographic negatives. They're an important backup for prints that may be lost or damaged, and they are often much more resilient than the prints themselves, depending on the printing process that was used to print your prints. So there are a couple of options for storing your negatives. You can place the negative strips into archival quality plastic enclosures and keep them in binders, just like with your photographic prints. It's a good way to keep everything together. Or you can place the strips into specially sized negative envelopes and keep them in a negative box. So this will definitely be a more costly option, and one that does not enable you to look at the negatives without removing them from the envelopes. So I would really recommend the plastic sleeve option. That's what we do with the archives. So the other thing to remember is always wear gloves when handling negatives so you don't end up getting fingerprints on the images. Negatives are very sensitive to temperature and humidity changes. So if your film is starting to deteriorate, you will start to smell a vinegary odor. It's best to segregate any items that are already deteriorating and already creating this vinegar smell. In some cases, storing these records in cold storage can halt further decay. The best thing to do with records in this state is to digitize them if possible and then store them in cold storage. But ultimately, there's no way to fully stop the degradation once it's started. So just to let you know, you may not have the ability to do this in your home, but ideal storage for negatives is between 2 and 13 degrees Celsius with a relative humidity of between 30 and 35%. So obviously this can be a bit of a challenge at home, but if you can find a cool, dry place in your home, that will be the best place to store these records. It's good to note that black and white negatives are actually a bit more hardy than color and less susceptible to temperature and humidity changes. Now, the same advice applies to storing slides. You can use plastic sleeves, paper sleeves, or specially made boxes available from archival supply companies. Now, digitizing photographs is a great way to make them more accessible on a number of platforms. It's much easier to share digital records with other family members, obviously, especially if they live far away. I recently digitized a collection of my grandfather's photographs to share with our relatives in Australia. It's been incredible to connect with these family members over these historic images. The important thing to be aware of with scanning your photographs is that digital files have a very short shelf life compared to a physical photograph. And digitization is great for access and helps to preserve records that are actively deteriorating. But unfortunately, it's not a magic solution. Digital files are also very susceptible to technological obsolescence, and they will actually deteriorate over time. This is a process called bit rot. So if you intend to keep your digital photographs for the long term, you'll need to make sure that you're backing them up on external hard drives and migrating their formats over time as photo formats change. So to ensure the longest digital life possible, make sure you're scanning to popular formats that are less likely to become obsolete in the near future. So you can scan, I would suggest scanning photographs as TIFF files or JPEG files. TIFF files are going to be much bigger and take up much more space. JPEG is a compressed format, so they'll be smaller, the quality won't be as good. So these are best practice file formats that will help your digital files last longer. It's also important to check up on your digital files periodically to ensure they're still readable. So have a check on them once in a while. They will thank you for it. Lately, I've noticed that Apple products seem to have switched to a new photo format. So you'll start to see photos with a .heic file extension. And if you want to preserve these outside of your Apple device, I'd recommend converting them to a more long-term format like TIFF or JPEG. I don't want to go too far into the digital side of things today because we could talk for hours. And this workshop was really designed more about physical preservation. But the City of Coquitlam Archives also has a handout about maintaining digital records at home. If you're interested, get in touch and we can send you the fact sheet. Now, ideally, you will never frame or mount an original photograph. The exposure to light can be so damaging that it's always best to leave originals safely in storage. It's also always best to create duplicates of important photographs if you'd like to display them in their frames and keep the original safely in storage. If you feel like you really want to frame an original photograph or document for whatever reason, make sure to use 100% cotton mat and mounting boards. Always use a window mat and ensure you're using acid-free backing boards. So definitely like no cheap cardboard or masonite. These are full of acid and you want to avoid them. So you may want to consult a conservator if you have a very precious item that you would like to frame. You'll also want to avoid displaying a framed item anywhere near a heating source or fireplace. And ideally, it would be hung on a wall that does not receive direct sunlight to make sure that it stays in its great shape and doesn't fade. So the key to remember is that framing is not considered a method of preservation, and it's best avoided if possible. So frame your copies. So unfortunately, there are no local suppliers of archival supplies in the Lower Mainland. It's a pretty specialized industry, so there isn't a lot of competition. But in Canada, the main purveyor of archival supplies is Carmaclean. They're based in Toronto and their products can be ordered online. A second option is Brodart, which is based out of Markham, Ontario. Brodart carries all the supplies that I've mentioned today, as does Carmaclean. And you can also order all of these online. Most ship within about 2 weeks. Now, archival supplies can be costly, but I believe that preserving your family's past really is priceless. So I would encourage you to look into what supplies you might need to preserve your records at home. I would really suggest prioritizing the records that are most important to you, as well as those that are most likely to deteriorate, and rehouse those first. So to summarize, here are my top preservation tips for your photos. 1, always use archival quality storage materials. 2, store records in the dark. The dark is your friend. But 3, avoid basements and attics. They're dark, but they're not your friend. Number 4, avoid adhesives of any kind, just like, especially tape. Just tape is not your friend. You can use wheat pastes. Those are organic as an adhesive, but no inorganic adhesives. Use only archival grade plastics, so no PVC. Remove any staples or metal clips that will rust. You'll be surprised how quickly they will rust. Number 7, avoid folding. So creases will cause damage and they will speed up deterioration over time. And then finally, just avoid excessive handling as much as you can until they're in like a plastic enclosure, in which case you can hold them all you like. So by following these tips, you'll be giving your photographs the best chance at long-term survival and ensuring that they're going to be enjoyed for future generations. Now, sometimes records are just past the point where you will be equipped to bring them back to life and store them properly. So in those cases, it might be advisable to seek the assistance of a professional conservator. The conservators are highly skilled professionals who specialize in the treatment of documents, artwork, textiles, and furniture. So conservation treatment will reduce the risk of damage and deterioration. It will increase the life of your records. It will facilitate retrieval and handling. And if you ever choose to donate the records to an archives, the records will be preserved using best practices, and I promise an archivist will thank you. So to give you an example of the wonders of conservation treatment, this is a panoramic photograph of Our Lady of Fatima Church from the 1950s. It's in our collection here at the archives. Before it came to us, the photograph had been stored rolled up, so it had a lot of cracks, including that one major crack that you can see on the slide. So I decided this image was a good candidate for conservation treatment as the damage was completely beyond my abilities to rectify. A skilled conservator can take a photograph like this one that, as you can see, is in pretty rough shape and turn it into this. So the conservator was able to flatten the photograph, repair the significant cracks, and stabilize it so that we could handle it again without risking further damage. So now we can make this photo available for researchers. As far as I'm concerned, and I hope you will agree, conservators are magicians. As impressive as this is, though, it does come with a pretty high cost. So keep in mind that these services can be quite expensive. So it's best to reserve this type of treatment for only the most important photographs that you have. If you're interested in taking your records to be assessed by a conservator, you can search for one in your area by consulting the Canadian Association of Professional Conservators, and the link there is on the slide. Their website has a Find a Conservator section, which is very helpful. You can also ask an archives if they have a recommendation of a good conservator. Now, perhaps your family photographs tell an important story about the history of your community, or perhaps you have photographs that may be significant to a specific organization or maybe a specialized community. So an archives is able to preserve records in the best possible conditions and provide professional expertise. The records are also made available to researchers of all kinds, so we can help them learn about the past. Now, earlier we discussed the different types of value. So if you have records that you think might have historical or archival value, you may want to consider offering them to an archives for permanent preservation. Now, a couple of things to consider before offering your records to an archives. Some material, as we discussed, may be more sentimental, may have more sentimental than a historical value. But if you're unsure, an archivist will be able to tell you if the records would fit with their institution's collecting mandate. And when you donate your records to an archives, you'll sign a formal deed of gift, which transfers ownership and copyright to the archives. Now, this enables the archives to invest in the preservation of the material and to make it available to the public for research purposes, which is really the point of an archives, is to preserve and then make accessible. Now, I'm well aware that this has been an awful lot of information in a very short amount of time. I don't expect you to remember everything. The presentation has been recorded and I believe will be available after this on Facebook. So on this slide, I've provided some good web links that pertain to the preservation of family records. And these are a good place to start if you would like more information after this session today. There is a link to a step-by-step description of how to make your own humidification chamber at home. These are the instructions that my uncle used with great success. It provides easy to follow steps, lots of photographs of the process. So I think you'll find it's quite easy to do at home. I've also provided a link to a great YouTube webinar put together by the Association for Library Collections and Technical Services in the US. And there are some great tips in this Home Archivist video series. So thank you so much for attending this History Live presentation today, and thanks to Coquitlam Heritage for inviting me. If you have any follow-up questions after today, please feel free to contact us at the archives. Our contact information is there on the slide, or you can visit our website to access our online search portal. So that has descriptions of all of the records in our collection, everything we've digitized. And you can also find on our website a series of online exhibits that are super fun. They highlight the fascinating records we preserve in our holdings and some of Coquitlam's wonderful stories of its past. So best of luck preserving your family photos. Thank you so much. I'll pass it over to Abby to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Emily. I don't see any so far, but maybe we'll just give it a second and see if anybody has any right at the end here.
It was a big information jump. So.
It was.
And feel free, if you come up with questions after, there's anything you want to ask, feel free to get in touch with us at the archives. We're always here to help out.
We just got a thank you, Emily. Lots of great information in your presentation comment. So.
Oh, well, my pleasure.
And I think that's it.
Great. Thanks.